Hello and welcome to DawnNews English. I'm Nadia Naqi with you with a lot happening around the election, of course. Something which is very important are the decision taken by the caretaker setup. Revenue has been a problem in Pakistan. We have been hearing that, the revenue collection has to increase. And that is, of course, one of the targets that is always set whenever we go into deals with IMF. At the same time, you must have also heard that we need to broaden our tax base. However, the recent decision taken in the SIFC also by the caretaker finance minister regarding reforms in FBR. These reforms have been resisted by FBR itself. Why there is resistance against these reforms, and also can the caretaker setup actually go ahead with these reforms? This is all what we'll be discussing today on 20 Minutes. We have with us Dr. Mohammad Iqbal. He's a former Inland Revenue Policy member, FBR. Thank you so much for joining us. We have senior journalist Shahbaz Rana. Thank you, Shahbaz, for joining us. First of all, Shahbaz, I've been reading your stories regarding these reforms. Can you tell us why is there so much of resistance as far as the restructuring of FBR is concerned?
Thank you, Ms. Nadia. We have to see these reforms or FBI restructuring exercise in two perspectives. Number one, is there a need for reforms in the FBI? The answer is clearly yes. Number two, is it the right time to restructure the FBI, particularly when hardly 3 weeks are left in the extended tenure of the caretaker government? The answer is no. Number three, is the proposed reform structure or the FBI restructuring is the right thing that can be done, or can some improvements be made in the structure that had been presented to the SIFC and that still remains pending for the approval of the cabinet? I think a lot could have been done, but since the things are pushed in a haste, so we see resistance from both sides, particularly the customs. If I just go to the background, the original purpose of this reform exercise was not the separation of the customs and the Inland Revenue Service. Initially, the idea was to form a national tax authority in which the taxes of both provincial and the federal government would be collected under one umbrella, and there will be better coordination between the federal and the provincial governments. But this proposal could not get the approval of the Prime Minister's office. I did a story at that time that the NTA had been struck down by the Prime Minister. And there was a view from within the PM's cabinet that this is not the right time and there will be constitutional challenge. Subsequently, when the matter was again taken up, the idea of separation of the customs service from the Inland Revenue Service came up. And this was not part of the original plan. Initially, the IRS service did not give any resistance to it. Apparently, they thought the idea would not get the required endorsement or the backing of the relevant quarter, so they played a role of the silent spectator. When they saw things moving at a faster pace, particularly after the January 3rd meeting of the SIFC, in which it was given in principle approval, then the IRS started showing some resistance. Does the IRS have a mandate to put a resistance, particularly when it is related to the restructuring? I think IRS should not be bothered about the restructuring exercise because it is not going to lose anything out of this exercise. Right. The only concern that can be, and that is a genuine concern of many people, including mine, the timing is not right. And the timing question has to be decided by the SIFC or the federal government or even the next government.
Okay, so basically, Dr. Iqbal, as Shahbaz puts it, restructuring, yes, there has to be restructuring done, but he believes that timing is not right. Do you also look at this at the same manner?
Actually, Nadia, I think whether or not a particular service likes the reforms or doesn't like it is not relevant. The reforms have to be seen whether they are going to be a service for the nation and for the economy and for the job of tax collection, which is, as you have already pointed out, is not up to the desired level. That should be the sole parameter or sole yardstick to judge these reforms. So basically, Whether one of the stakeholders, customs or the IRS likes it or not is not that important from my point of view. We basically need to understand what is being done through the proposed restructuring. As Shahbaz has pointed out, there is a need for major improvement in the working of FBR. I personally am, despite being a former part of the FBR, a great critic of what the FBR has been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. It has resorted to oppressive taxation, extractionary measures, and created serious problems for the ease of business. That should be the object of the government. Again, it has not been able to collect the desired amount of revenue. Certain targets are achieved each month, but we have to look this performance from a broader perspective. The revenues collected by FPR and the consequent share that goes to the federation is not sufficient even to meet the debt servicing costs. What about the non-developmental and development expenses? What about the expense on defense? What about the expense on running the civil government? The performance of FPR has to be gauged from these criteria. Borrowing from Shakespeare, there is not only something that is rotten in the state of Denmark, but a lot is rotten. But whether these proposed restructuring will stem the rot or not, that is what needs to be considered. In my personal opinion, the direction of these reforms, if we can call them reforms, is not correct. The issues are vastly different from what the government is trying to achieve. In my opinion, the further fragmentation, as Shahbaz rightly pointed out, the pendulum has swung to the entirely opposite direction. We started with an aim to integrate the entire tax collecting machinery, but we have ended up with further fragmenting the tax machinery. This to me seems incomprehensible, that we started with one objective and we ended up with trying to achieve an entirely diametrically opposite objective. So basically, we need to analyze and understand what is being tried, and is it the solution of the actual problems? That, in my opinion, is the crunch question.
Okay, so as far as Shahbaz, maybe the finance minister really wants, everyone wants to get something to be done on the table so that, our revenue increases. So with these proposed reforms, whatever, proposal is there, do you see that revenue shall increase with these reforms, even if you forget about whether they are being done in haste or not?
Well, in present form, there will be setback to revenue collections if the reform process, I would not even call it a reform, it's a basically restructuring exercise. It is more of an administrative restructuring. Reform is something else, and it has become a buzzword and used for everything, which is not a correct thing to do. I think at this stage, what the FBR or the government can do is to separate the tax policy from the Federal Board of Revenue without doing anything else at this point in time. That can be done without bringing any changes in the laws, because there was initially an opinion expressed by the FBR that even the revenue division cannot be separated from the FBR, and there is a need for legal changes, and a presidential ordinance has to be brought in. But then the law division opinion that this can be done. So in my opinion, only the focus should be right now by the caretaker government to separate the policy function from the FBR's operations without doing anything else. If that is done, that will be a major thing, because a similar decision had been taken back in 2019 by the government of the Prime Minister Imran Khan, and that was never implemented. Because the thing that Dr. Iqbal has just pointed out, like the narrow tax base, the extraction of revenues, the solution is separation of operations and policy. If you go towards the separation of the customs service group from the Inland Revenue Service, this is entirely a different exercise. and it will require massive changes in in laws and rules of business of 1973. At one point in time, the government may also have to think about separation of both the entities. But this is not the right time, as I have earlier said. If you push through the things, it will create problems. And if the revenue collection starts falling behind the targets, then we may have problems in the IMF program. And the government shouldn't think of those things. And more importantly, when there are elections on Feb 8, such kind of drastic decisions should be left on the next government instead of by the caretaker government. And there is no doubt that interim finance minister Dr. Shahbaz Akhtar and the military establishment has put a lot of efforts in bringing some kind of new structure in the FBR, and to get some credit, they can separate the policy from the operation. At the same time, I also want to highlight something which I think we all should consider is the point that right now you would see news stories coming, some stories supporting the reforms, other not supporting. I have seen a new phenomenon which should be discouraged. The phenomena is that there's a direct personal attacks against the customs officers who are behind or who are supporting these restructuring exercises. We should limit our criticism, our opinion only to the extent of policies and the decisions. We should not bring in the personality. This does not give any good taste to the whole exercise, because when you start discussing the personalities, their personal conduct, it looks like as if something personal is going on. In the matter of the state, there shouldn't be anything personal but objective and professional.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Iqbal, I was also reading, as Shahbaz is pointing out, that customs seem to be happy, when you separate the operations of inland and customs. However, the inland revenue seems unhappy. Even if the operations are separated, what difference does it make to both entities?
So let me first address the last point that Shahbaz has highlighted, bringing personalities into it. I think that is a deplorable, condemnable act by whosoever is behind it. Both the services have worked together under the FDR and previously under the Central Board of Revenue for about 100 years. In 1924, CBR was created. So it is almost, we have reached 100 years milestone, and rather than celebrating that milestone, we have started resorting to infighting. That is not to be supported at any cost, and it should be discouraged with all the force that is available. Coming next to the specifics of the reforms, I will differ with what Shahbaz is saying, that the separation of policy and operation would be a viable thing. It will not. Firstly, because the FDR is the only reservoir which has the capacity to make tax policy. Let me further clarify that tax policy is not akin to, for example, the industrial policy or the agricultural policy or Pakistan's Afghanistan policy. It is a living document. It is contained in the acts and the laws under which various taxes are collected. These laws are applied on a daily basis. These are subject to judicial review. Any authority outside FDR will not have the adequate capacity to form the policy. If you take some person out of FDR and place them under a separate organization and call that if we have separated policy from operation, that would be a misnomer. Firstly, because the same person would be doing that job, and secondly, because they will be deprived of the input that they receive from their colleagues working in the operation wing, from the field offices. So tax policy is something, it is not like an industrial policy that you can ask an international consultant to frame a very beautifully written document that will remain consigned to some files. It is something, it is a living document and it operates on a daily basis. So in my personal opinion, separation of policy from operations in the context of Pakistan, when the tax policy is evolving on a daily basis, it would not be a good idea. because it will also impact the revenue, because the revenue that FBR or any tax collecting machinery collects is a function of both the administration, which we ordinarily call the operation wing, and the policy. If we divorce policy from operations or from administration, then who will be responsible for the revenue effort? Keeping in mind our culture, one side will be blaming the other side for the behavior. So, in my personal opinion, that proposal also needs to be deliberated upon at a much greater length than it is being done. Secondly, coming to separation of customs, meaning an authority that is collecting taxes at the port stage, and IRS, which is responsible for collecting revenue at the domestic level, is also a grave mistake, because the economic transaction cannot be bifurcated. Whatever we import, whether it consists of raw materials or finished goods, does not somehow get dumped after import. They find their way into the domestic economy. The entire life cycle of a good coming into the economy starts with the imports, and still the finished good finds its way to the consumer. So, firstly, let me point out further that at some time, about 12 or 13 years, the tax collection was fragmented on a horizontal basis. The sales tax on goods is collected by FBR, and sales tax on services is being collected by respective revenue authorities of the province. Now we are going for a vertical integration, a vertical fragmentation. The taxpayers are already paying the cost of the horizontal fragmentation, because they have to deal separately with 5 tax collecting authorities, 4 revenue authorities of provinces, and 1 FBR. Now we are aiming to go for a vertical fragmentation that will impact the taxpayers as well as, because if a certain good is imported into Pakistan at an under-cost value, which we know is rampant, it will remain underpriced throughout its life cycle in the domestic economy. So the taxes collected at the domestic stage are impacted to a considerable extent at their time of their import into Pakistan. So segmenting these aspects would be an artificial. We would be creating an artificial reality. It will not be the reality that is actually reflected in the market or in the economy. So both the proposals, I do not support either of the proposals, irrespective of whether IRS is happy with it, or custom is happy with it, or any Tom, Dick, or Harry is happy with it. These are not good for the economy and for Pakistan.
Okay, so Shahbaz, towards the end, I'd like to ask you, this restructuring and the reforms that are required in the FBR, are they not being deliberated upon with the stakeholders? Is it just the SIFC, taking decisions?
No, that is not true. It has been deliberated with the concerned stakeholders. The chairman FBR has remained part and parcel of these deliberations. The finance minister has interacted with other stakeholders. The interactions have been at Rawalpindi, at GHQ. The instructions, the deliberations have been at the Prime Minister's office level. But the operational details, like the amendments in various laws and rules, which would involve the cabinet division, the establishment division, and the law division, I think the deliberation with them had not been done, because those were the operational and procedural things, but very important procedural things. It was not like something that was going on in silo, because it is a question of timing. Had they taken the mainstream political parties into confidence, that would have been much better, because that would have won them the support which was needed. Because if they do anything right now, that might be reversed by the next government, particularly by the PMLN government. They may not like those reforms. I just very quickly want to respond to what
Dr. Iqbal
Dr. Iqbal has said about the separation. Look, he has remained the head of the IR policy. He knows more than I do. The same FBR Inland Revenue Policy can be separated from the FBR operations and put under the Revenue Division. The same workforce, the same human resource, that the FBR right now has. The Secretary Revenue Division will be different from the Chairman FBR, which is very important. We have two examples, and why it is needed. Nowadays, we don't see any kind of revenue shortages. When there are revenue shortfalls, they take certain policy measures, they propose certain things which in short term increase revenues, but in the longer term, they harm the economy. Like they increase regulatory duty without any justification. A country like Pakistan, where IT has to be the norm of the day, we have imposed heavy duties on the import of the mobile phone because that is giving them the revenues. We have imposed taxes, advanced taxes, withholding taxes on certain transactions, which we should not, because that facilitates them to get easy revenues. At the same time, in past, the custom policy used to be with the FBR. Now it has been separated. There is a separate tariff policy board, which is headed by the Commerce Minister. And when the policy proposal goes there, it is deliberated by all the stakeholders instead of just the FBR and the Finance Minister. So in short term, it looks like as if you separate policy from them, no one can take care of those things. No, the same taxmen, they will take care of the policy, but under a different administrative structure that will be helpful for the economy.
All right. Yes, you can disagree with Dr. Iqbal. Dr. Iqbal has given his sort of...
Nadia, please give me 2 minutes to clarify.
Sure.
What Shahbaz Rana is saying is based on a wrong presumption. FBR is not the beneficiary of the taxes it collects. Unlike what people may like to think, FBR does not have underground vaults where the entire tax collected is stored and a chairman goes to them one time in a day and takes out the money. The entire amount goes to the finance. Finance division is the beneficiary of the taxes collected by FBR. FBR does not get anything from that. So whenever there is a revenue imperative, it is not due to FBR. It is due to the finance division. So basic conflict of interest, if there is any, should be in the tax policy and finance division. We should ideally have a separate revenue minister who should not, the revenue division should not be reporting to the finance minister, because finance ministry has its own considerations. And some other government objectives are tried to be achieved through the tax policy. For example, let's take an example. IPPs enjoy tax exemption. FBR was not the motive force behind granting that tax exemption. It was the power division of that. Similarly, the auto policy forces FBR to forego more than 100 billion rupees of custom duty to provide incentive to inefficient local manufacturer or rather assemblers of motor cars. So whatever distortion is in the tax policy is not because of FBR. It is because of the rest of the government. And what we are trying to do is to give, rather than all the international donors want FBR to be autonomous. The present restructuring is aimed at taking away whatever autonomy was available to the FBR, and it is basically a retrogressive step. Rather than we are not going forward, we are going backwards.
All right, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Mohammad Iqbal and Shahbaz Rana. Let's see how slow this process is going to be in terms of implementing. Whether it's going to be left for the next government after election to restructure and introduce reforms, or will it be done as in the implementation part will be done in haste? Thank you so much for being with us. That's all for now. Take care and goodbye.